Hey, welcome back to the For Real Though Show. I am your host, Christopher Keith, and want to thank you for joining me for the second part of the series of my complicated relationship with Christianity. So we're going to start off with a paper that I wrote. It was an assignment that when I was in Webster University in St. Louis. This is from it's like September 1st, 2004, and the motivation for the assignment, the task was to answer this question: why people threaten violence and wage war in the name of religion. So I'm going to read part of that paper to you to get us started. Now, after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. That's from Judges chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. The first reason I can think as to why people threaten violence and wage war in the name of religion historically is because they feel a sense or feel a mandate by God. That sense of what I call the deity factor can be the ultimate motivation to cause one to wage war in a most fierce manner. There is no higher calling for a believer than to have that calling from a deified figure. There are a couple reasons that come to mind. First, when a person or a nation feels that they have a call from on high, the deity factor says that the calling is from the one who is all powerful and able to win any battle against any opponent. After all, no one believes his God is second to another. Second, the deity factor is credited for creation as well as life sustaining power for and over the created, causing an ultimate sense of loyalty. That sense of gratitude is a powerful motivator in that one doesn't mind giving his life in service in order to fight for his God's battles. The thinking is that even a tragic death on the battlefield in this type of service carries with it an eternal reward. Sure, there are tangible benefits to winning wars. The winning side the winning side enjoys the spoils, but the deity factor can cause one to wage war with no tangible benefit at all, but only the glory of the God he is representing. So I'll stop there, but hopefully you see where I'm going. Uh, Back in 2001, when we had the attacks, 9/11 and all that, people wondered, how can people, run them, get on the plane and run into some buildings? It's the deity factor. If you wonder how people can strap a bomb to themselves and blow up themselves as well as a community of other people, it's the deity factor. Okay. So with that, the deity factor can cause some people to do some pretty radical things, And even though I just gave some examples of, you know, uh, terrorist threats from, Islamic people or, groups who say they represent Islam, obviously Christians have been doing that for, hundreds of years at least, maybe thousands of years. And so that's where we're going. So let's talk about my deity experience, my deity factor experience. And we're going to start with the stupidest thing that I ever did in church. Okay, it's the stupidest thing I ever did in church because of the deity factor. So, I'm not, that's why I'm letting you know I'm not blaming anybody for their deity factor experiences. It's just the reality of what it is. And so here's something that I did. So I guess it was in the 90s. Oh man, it might have even been the late 80s. I think this was probably the late 80s or early 90s. So we had a guy from Africa come. He was from Benin City, Nigeria, and his name was Benson Idahosa. And I remember it was really supposed to be a big deal. He was supposed to allegedly have raised three people from the dead. He was this powerful minister, blah blah blah. So I came to the service. It was a weekday service, and I just remember the parking lot was jam packed. You had to get there early to get a seat, and we started off, did the regular praise and worship thing, and then he came out. So he had this robe on, he had all his African garb down, whatnot. And I remember that the message, I don't remember what he talked about, but it was kind of underwhelming. I do remember feeling that it was underwhelming. And I remember that his shtick was he would say something like, you have to be holy, you have to be holy, and then people be like, hey man, whatever, then they get a little quiet because he really wasn't saying a whole lot. Then he go, excuse me, did they speak in tongues? Do we need interpretation? And then people would laugh, right? So, so he did his thing. It was cool. I remember thinking, it was underwhelming, but I thought, he was supposed to be this cold cat. So we get to the end of the service, and this is a first experience I had with something that happened in the church that night. So how can I say this? I'll just say it. It's the money line. Y'all ever heard of the money line? It's the money line. So this is how the money line went down that night, okay? And it was the first time I ever had an experience with the money line. So my man gets up there and he's like, hey, you want to be blessed, blah, 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 and, I need you to sow a seed, that sort of thing. And so he starts off $5,000, $5,000, and I mean, he was probably up there for 15, 20 minutes going on about this $5,000, hey, and I was like, I'm sitting there like, hey, I want to be blessed. I wish I had $5,000 to give, I would, right? And he was like, I didn't say that, I said it to myself. And he was like, if you don't have it, believe God for it. Believe God for it. You come down here and give it by faith, right? So let me tell you what your boy did. Now, your boy got out his checkbook, and I wrote a check out for $5,000. Now, mind you, I'm definitely under 25. Okay. Not that means anything, depending on your bank, but I probably had like $250 in the bank, right? Something like that. Maybe. Okay. But I get, and you're like, wow, man, why would you do that, right? Deity factor. This is what my deity factor told me. I'm gonna believe God for it, right? So when I went up there and got in line, okay, and I wrote that check, and I put it in, and this was my thinking. I'm gonna believe God that money is gonna be in the bank when they cash that check. Like something's gonna happen. I don't know whether I'm gonna get a check in the mail. I don't know if somebody gonna drop me off some cash dollar bills or something, but something's gonna happen, and I'm gonna get this money, right? So I stand up there, and I get my check. I go back and sit down, and so then it was like it was like those infomercials where they go, but wait, there's more. So then it was like, you don't have 5,000, 4,000, So then it was like 4,000, and then it continued 3,000. If you can do 3,000, right? Then you can do 1,000, and then you can do 500, right? And so a little bit more wisdom now. I kind of know. I've seen it, more than once, so now it's kind of like it goes start at one number, and then you dribble down, dribble down, dribble down, and then you get to the end, right? Because it's like you start off like, like, did God say 5,000 or did he not say 5,000, right? So if God said 5,000, then why would there be 4,000, 3,000, 2,000? But that, that's some logical stuff that come into play now, right? It's not what I was thinking then. But they basically he trickled all the way down the road until it got to where I called it the Troy MF, right? The Troy MF, it's an acronym. So after you get all the way down, 1,000, 500, and then it's just the rest of you, mother, whatever y'all got, right? That's what it stands for. The rest of you, whatever you want to give, yeah, y'all come on down here, yo, okay, you want to do it, come on down here, right? And so I gave it, right? I put that in there, and I went home. And let me tell you, I was believing God that 5,000 was gonna be in there. As a matter of fact, I was like Spike Lee. I was like Giant on Mo Better Blues. I was like, I won't sell it, Bleak. I won't sell it. You'll play again. Like that's how I was. Like I was like, Lord, I won't spend the money. I promise. I won't go buy a new pair of Air Jordans. I won't spend the money. That was my attitude, right? But man, after about 10 days, bro, it was like Tim Hardaway was doing a crossover with my check. It was bouncing so good. It was bouncing well. He was taking it to the hoop, finger rolling, everything, right? And I just remember getting that check back in the mail, and I was like, man, and I got these overdraft fees. So it's just kind of like, wow, you know, so that's the deity factor, man. But see, what you have to remember and understand that there was a transition that went from my old traditional churches to what I was experiencing in Abundant Life. Uh, and I had done, I it's not like I hadn't experienced it before. Once I had moved back from Indiana, and I was back in East St. Louis with my dad, and we were going to different churches, but it was just to a stronger degree. And that is that the way God speaks to you in my old traditional churches, it was just strictly through the Bible. So if you know, some sort of, you know, hey, what is God saying about this? Well, turn to Psalm 91 or what have you, you know, turn to Proverbs, turn to Romans, Colossians, whatever. And then you would hear that. And then the preacher would just speak on that subject, whatever his subject matter is, based on the scripture reference, right? So, but in these Word of Faith charismatic churches, we not only dealt with the scriptures, we got this other element of God speaking to you himself, right? So that was a transition that I had never really heard of. You know, I might have thought that God maybe spoke to the minister uh, in terms of God speaking to me personally. Um, I don't think I really grappled with that much. So, but when the transition happened and I started going to the churches where they were saying these kind of things, you know, that was new to me. And I wasn't skeptical. You know, I wasn't really skeptical because unless they really said something that I thought was ridiculous, then you know I was like, okay, wow, you know, you can have this relationship with God because it was really it was really taught that you know you too can have this relationship with God. God can speak to you. You can pray, and the Holy Spirit will speak to you. Blah blah blah. Give you directions on your life, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I know you're probably thinking, yeah, that $5,000 was pretty ridiculous, right? You're right. I mean, you're right. You're right. I'm just, I'm just testifying. But let me go on and say this before we get into a Butter Life Fellowship. You know, let me just say that when I first started going there, I mean, it was just really great. You know, it was a young church. Okay, according to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, you know that Pastor Matthew Ferguson had become a full-time pastor. You know, in other words, without a job in 1982, and I probably started going around 87, 88. So it was still a relatively young church. It's great fellowship. I remember going to new beginners classes, and we had some really awesome teachers. I had a lot of fun. It was a great camaraderie, very positive, very beautiful. Uh, I wouldn't say it was multicultural. It was mostly Black, but we had a few white people there too. And so it was like a big family. You know, I remember, you know, even with new beginners class, if you don't know, that's usually if you join a church, a lot of churches now have a new beginners class. They kind of give you the basics of Christianity, the gospel, and also the tenets of what the church itself believes. Okay. And so I remember having so much fun in new beginners class that at first I didn't really want to go. I was like, I don't want to go to the class and then go to church. But I actually really, really enjoyed it. And so much so that sometimes I didn't really necessarily want to go to church after that. I was like, oh, got everything I need out this class today. I'm straight. You know, but I stuck with it, you know. Another thing that was really attractive was the strong men's group. We had a men's fellowship group. I think when I first started going, we were meeting on Saturday mornings, if I'm correct, maybe once a month, maybe every week. I don't remember, but I do remember having a strong uh, men's fellowship group. It was really powerful. Some strong Black men in there, you know, that you know were laying their lives bare, and you know that was really attractive to me because I was still learning how to be a man myself. Okay, so I was an adult with responsibilities, but I didn't really know what it was to be a man or anything like that. So that was really attractive to me. Uh, and overall, you know, it was a very, you know, welcoming church. Lots of friendly faces, and you know, it grew from you know having 2 services to 3 services at one point. And I give, you know, Pastor Ferguson, you know, I give him credit. You know, I give him a lot of credit for that because your leadership starts at the top. And you know, one thing about Word of Faith charismatic churches is there that's also different is they may join in with an organization, if you will, but they're not governed by an organization necessarily unless they decide to get up under one. So really, the pastor is he's the CEO, if you will. You know what I mean? He doesn't have a board or a deacon board or what have you that could kick him out. You know what I mean? He's the guy that started it, and he pretty much has the power over it. So, I think that has its positives, it has its negatives. One of the obviously the positives is that you can really go with what you feel God is asking you to do. And the negative is if you're wrong, or if you get ego driven, then you're gonna really have a tough time. It's gonna be a tough time. So anyway, I give them a lot of credit for that. Let's see what after that. Let's see, they talked about, hey, don't be a church pure. You know what I mean? Don't just be a guy that comes to the church and sits down and don't do nothing. So I was like, okay, cool. What am I interested in? Well, I was interested in the tape ministry because I used to get a tape like after every service because the messages were so, enthralling to me. They were so good. And, so I used to get up, spend my $5 on the tape, every Sunday, practically every Sunday. And I said, man, that'd be something I'd be interested in. So I decided that I was going to apply. Well, I was going to join the tape ministry because they said they needed people. Now, so I didn't get accepted. I don't know why. I tend to think it's either because I bounced that check or because I wasn't like a regular tither. So now they didn't tell you had to tithe to join this tape ministry, but that's just my guess because there was no other reason for me, not to. I was a faithful member. I was there every Sunday. I was giving, you know what I mean? But I was disappointed about that for sure. And I ain't gonna say I was bitter, but I thought to myself for a long time I wasn't gonna join any ministries. After that, I was like, hey, if y'all gonna reject me to sell some tapes, y'all think I'm steal the money or something? If y'all like that, then why would I do something else? But later on, I ended up joining the youth ministry, which was extremely gratifying. So maybe we'll get to that a little later. But I ended up, it wasn't right away, but it was some time later, I ended up joining the youth ministry. So as I said, we got to where we were having 3 services, and then the issue of expansion came up. And we were talking about moving to a new building, and not just moving to somebody else's building, but building one from scratch, straight up from the ground. And so I remember we went on Parker Road, trying kind of going ahead here. Brothers got together with the pastor, and we went and blessed the ground, what have you, and and then we did that, and then they had some opening with some public officials, where we were gonna break ground and all that. So then we started fundraising for it, not like chicken dinners and stuff like that. Pastor Ferguson was really like, he used to talk about that all the time. We don't do chicken dinners here, we're gonna give and this, that, and the other. And so it took quite a while, for this thing to come to get moved. As a matter of fact, it took a few years before anything, any ground really got broke on that property, before any machines were put out there. And after a while, we started off having just a building fund, and then after a while, we started to get a little bit more pressure to give, right? And it's funny because a friend of mine, a friend of mine that I went to church with, he used to say, man, every time Pastor Ferguson get up and talk, man, before he sit down, man, it's gonna end up being about some money. And I hadn't really noticed it, but I was like, oh, I kind of hear you on that, I'm saying? I kind of feel you on that, but it didn't really bother me, you know what I mean? It didn't bother me, but it really bothered him. And he's pissed. It was just burn him up, because he felt like he was running game, he's trying to get these dollars out of our pockets. And I guess for that sense, I thought to myself, maybe at that time my thinking was, hey, I got what I got, and what I don't have, I don't have, you know what I mean? Because I had young kids at the time, so I had responsibilities, man. I can't be, I got to pay rent. So, I really wasn't tripping off that. But then, like I said, as the years went on, there started to be a lot of pressure to give. And so because pastor would be like, we ain't taking no loans out. We're gonna go into this debt free. God wants us to be debt free. And again, he's speaking as a person, who, is saying that God is telling him this is how we gonna do it, right? And so, at those churches, that's how you get down. That's how they get down. That's Gus. If y'all want to say hi to Gus, he's listening. So anyway, so then we have another special service. So this is Gus. You gonna let me be great? All right. So see, he playing with me. Anyway, so we got some visitors, and it was a pastor named Wellington Boone. So Wellington Boone had been to our church a few times, and he was out of, I want to say, Richmond, Virginia, where he was doing ministry and back and forth to Atlanta and whatnot. And so I liked him a lot. I thought he was a pretty deep cat. I thought he was, pretty cerebral and, whatnot. And, kind of a bold teacher, a little funny, a little humorous, but he seemed like a cool cat. So after a few visits, he comes to service with like 4 of these different guys with him, right? I just call them Boone's boys because I don't remember none of their names. So this is what they call this. What we're doing now is they were doing a building. So instead of have a building fund, they wanted to do promissory notes, like an investment. Okay, so they wanted us to invest a certain amount of money towards the building fund, and then after a couple of years, you would get a certain rate of return. Okay, but to introduce this, they had Boone's boys. It was again, I think, like another midweek service. They had Boone's boys all pull up in the front, and they were sitting up there, and all like they was the Mac and stuff, right? All like they was all the Macs, if you will. And so Pastor Ferguson gets up and he's like, hey, y'all know Bishop Boone, this and the other. These are guys he runs with, and these guys are successful, blah, blah, blah. They got money, blah, blah, blah. And they're going to show you how you get money too, blah, blah, blah. So I never forget. So one guy in particular, he got up, and this is like before they introduced the whole promissory note thing. They just kind of giving a resume, And so this guy gets up and he's talking about how he go to Bahamas and stay in $5,000 a night rooms, and and he even said some stupid stuff like this. He was like, I don't eat leftovers. I don't eat leftovers. Like, he didn't say it like, I really don't like the way the food tastes the next day, right? He was like, I don't eat leftovers, like he was like it was a flex. And I remember thinking to myself, this Negro crazy, right? You obviously don't eat lasagna or spaghetti or, nothing like that, muscatoli, because that stuff is good the next day, right? I'm trying not to cuss because my mom don't like me to cuss, but anyway, so, but I thought to myself, it was just the way he carried it, you know what I mean? It was real arrogant and stuff. And so, they talked all that, him and his boys got to talking all that about how successful they were. They got us money, they invest, they this, that, and the other, and then they introduced the whole promissory notes. And, so I think it went from a couple thousand, 5,000, 10,000, whatever. And then they were guaranteeing you a certain rate of return, don't quote me, but I think the most you could have got was like 20%, 23% or something like that. I'm not sure if that's legal, but that's what we were doing. Okay. And so during that service, I remember one of these guys, I think this was the I don't eat leftover guy. He said that he really wanted to spend some time with Pastor Ferguson, and he asked if he could, and then Pastor Ferguson said, well, if you fly up here, son, I'll spend time with you. I'll see you. And so he did. And then Pastor talked about the same thing. He was like, he's a good young man, blah, blah. And he said he wanted to spend time with me. And I'm like, if you fly up here, I'll do it. Now, this is where stuff started to hit the fan for me, and where I kind of got an attitude. Because, like, I wasn't really one to be on Pastor Ferguson's jock or anything like that, but I really admired and respected him and looked up to him. And so to a degree, I almost like wouldn't really try to bother him, you know what I'm saying? Because I felt like he had a lot on his plate, but recently he had started saying things like, using terms like he was daddy, right? Like our spiritual father. So he was like, I'm daddy, you know what I mean? Y'all come to me, you said the other. But I knew of people who couldn't, you couldn't see him, you know what I mean? You're not going to be able to to meet with this cat, right? You know, because he was too busy or whatever. And you know, so that was something to me. I'm like, how this cat gonna come in? So in classic CMAC form, I wrote a letter, and I wrote like a 12-page letter. As a matter of fact, typed it out, you know, kind of like a college paper, and you know, and it was. I don't remember everything I asked him about, but I did start to ask him about some of the things we were talking about in church that he would say that were kind of off-putting, you know, that I kind of cast aside. And but one of the things that really centered, you know, one of the things that I remember saying specifically was, why would you walk up in church and talk about how somebody who don't go here, who don't attend here, can just come up here and spend some time with you, right? But it's cats in the parking lot who out here parking cars every week, every Sunday, right? They never get to sit in the service. They get a free tape, right? But they out there security, make sure nobody car get broken into and all this. You got other people, you got people like me working the youth ministry. We can't get no time with you, right? And I just felt like it was foul, you know, but I wasn't mean spirited about it. It was a very open, compassionate, you know, letter. You know, and I even told him, you know, to keep it all the way 100 with you. I'm like, hey, you know, I named my son's middle name is named after your first name. My son's name is Christian Matthew, and that Matthew came from Ferguson, you know, because that's how much I respected him. So I just felt like, you know what, you know, I told him that too, and I told him that in the letter. I was like, you know, so I just don't understand. You know, I need you to help me understand certain things because, you know, all this pressure from the building fund, blah, 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 blah. And again, some of the, you know, he started to say some off-putting things. He was kind of starting to be a bully about this stuff. And then the thing with the guy, coming to Atlanta, well, that just, excuse me, the thing with the guy coming from Atlanta, that just was the last straw for me, you know. So I asked him about it. Fast forward maybe a week after that, I mailed a letter to the church. And a couple weeks after that, I was in the service. I went up, you know how you go shake the pastor's hands or whatever. And I went up, shook his hand, like, hey, Pastor Ferguson, how you doing? I'm fine, you know. And he said, I got your letter, you know. I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna get with you soon. So to this day, he never got with me. He never got with me, never followed up, never heard a word from him. As a matter of fact, I think about a year and a half later, I ended up sending him another letter about something else. I'm sure I was a little more forceful this time, but I still didn't hear from him. Okay, so we're all going somewhere. I mean, we're going somewhere with this story. So then, so I got into relationship with one of Boone's youth leaders. His name was Dean Nelson, and Dean and I became friends, and we were, you know, we used to email and stuff each other all the time. And I was cool with his wife, Julia, and it was kind of funny because they both grew up liberals and then they became conservatives. But we developed a friendship, and he was having a youth conference down in Atlanta, and so he invited me to come down to do like a little workshop. So I said, cool. Packed up my stuff, went down there on my own dime, and the church was at Abundant Life Church. It was also Abundant Life Church, but it was is currently pastored by Woodrow Walker. Now, the funny Woodrow Walker thing is I've known Woodrow Walker since I was a kid because he and my dad were best friends. They used to sell insurance together. They used to live in the same apartment in Clayton together. You know, they were bachelor buds and all of that. So they were really tight. And so, and I was, you know, so I liked Woodrow, known his wife, Francine, again, since I was little. And Pastor Walker is actually from Lovejoy, Illinois. And, you know, he got into ministry, started a church down there. And so I was like, oh man, it's cool. It's like going home. It's all good. So I went. We had did some of the youth things. And then the night time we were having this big service. So, but the service wasn't necessarily youth oriented, but it was a service. So, but it was at the same church. So I'm walking down the hallway, I guess in the evening, close to the evening, and when the service was going to start, because I had been there all day. And who do I run into? Pastor Ferguson. So Pastor Ferguson's sitting there in the chair, and I walk up to him and I'm like, "Hey, how you doing, Pastor?" And he looked at me, and was the cat glad to see me? No, he was like, "What are you doing here?" you know And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm here with Dean. Dean invited me. As a matter of fact, I know Pastor Walker. I've been knowing him all my life. And Pastor Walker was also a really good friend of Pastor Ferguson's. So, and he had come and preached at our Abundant Life, in St. Louis. So, Pastor Ferguson didn't know this, but, you just seen the look on his face. He was like he was disgusted or something, that little old me would be down there. You know what I mean? Why he down there, right? And somebody would invite me to do a workshop of all things. So because Lord knows, outside of, I can't even do tapes for him. Now I happen to be in the youth ministry, but truth be told, and maybe we'll get to that later, he didn't really know who the hell was in the youth ministry other than, the guy who he appointed to be in the youth ministry. So he didn't know one way or the other. He didn't know what I could do, what I was about, or anything like that. He had never took the time. So no problem. So, but again, he kind of gave me the chump move, you know what I'm saying? And I was put off by it, but I was like, hey, whatever. So we have this service, and it turns out to be a foot washing ceremony. So you got several pastors up there from all over the country, Pastor Ferguson being one of them. You also have one of the guys, Mr. I don't eat leftover guy. He was up there. And it's funny because at that time, Boone had said something about having to get this guy out of financial difficulty. Now, this was since, he was at our Abundant Life in St. Louis. So after he did all that bragging about his $5,000 room night in the Bahamas, and he don't eat leftovers, this guy had to bail him out financially because of some bad investments he made. Okay, now, but I'm the only cat from St. Louis that was at that service other than Pastor Ferguson that knew about that, right? So these people in Atlanta, they didn't make that connection, you know what I mean? But I did. So, but anyway, so Bishop Boone, you got to understand his position with Matthew Ferguson is he was like over him. He was like his overseer, if you will. And so, he was like his OG. And so were all these other ministers that were there. Okay. And they were all on this panel. And what he did is he did what Jesus did to his disciples, which was to bless them and wash their feet. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to a foot washing service, but let me tell you, it is a really, really beautiful thing. It's a really beautiful thing because it takes a lot of humility to get on your knees and wash somebody's feet, especially if somebody's washing your feet who you look up to. So that's a really big deal. And, so what he did, it was really nice. He spoke words, really beautiful words and positive affirming words over each person. And he had them take their shoes off and stuff. They put their feet in the basin and he washed their feet. And I remember, everybody, it was like a very moving experience for everybody, even for us just sitting there, and everybody, there was a lot of tears and stuff. A lot of people were, really emotionally affected, in a good way. And I remember Pastor Ferguson, where he was really shook. Like he was just all the way broke down, right? And I thought to myself, man, that's pretty cool. You know what I'm saying? That's pretty cool, that he got his blessing and stuff. And, because I kind of knew from my experiences with Pastor that he just was kind of like he was great when it came to preaching and stuff, but he really wasn't a social cat. So he seemed like an introvert, and therefore it seemed like he had like a chip on his shoulder, if you will. So I just felt good for him. I was really happy for him. I felt maybe that chip would dissipate. And again, if the story, it seemed like it's going a little bit out of order, it's because, I'm just trying to remember a lot of stuff. And I knew that this would be the most challenging part of this series, is the second part. But anyway, so no, it was a great service. It was beautiful. And so, that Saturday, pack my stuff up, go back to St. Louis. And so, I can't wait to go to service, to see how this would affect Pastor Ferguson, you know. And so he got up there, we did the thing, praise and worship, blah, blah, blah. He got up there and, he just went on one of his rants. And one of the first things he said on this rant, he said is, if you don't believe that I am the man that God called into your life, if you don't believe that I am the one, you may leave right now. Right? And I mean, he was like, it wasn't like saying it nicely, like he was going in, like all attitude, like going off. If you don't believe I'm the man of God, get out. He was like, get out. First he was like, you may leave. Then he was like, get out, And he just went on. So now he just got on this whole kick about how he was a prophet. God called him to be this apostle, blah, blah, blah. And if you don't follow him, you say something negative about him, if you challenge him, things will happen to you. The Bible says, touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm. I'm one of his prophets. So you say something about me, don't blame me. It wouldn't surprise me if you just drop dead. I'm not wishing that on nobody. I'm just saying, don't be surprised, and that's how he went down, so I mean, he came out like gangbusters, like instead of him being affirmed, and humbled by this experience, it just did the total opposite. It was like letting loose a lion, and who was like just devouring the whole service. It was just a whole hell of a lot of control. And he was saying things like, Pastor Ferguson was a military guy. He had been in the military in his past, so he was like, God told me I'm a general. I'm a general. And then I'm like, okay, well, that explains why you ain't got time for us privates, because, generals don't generally talk to privates, right? But again, I wasn't buying into that. Excuse me, get some water. I really wasn't buying into that. I thought it was ridiculous. And, so anyway, come to find out too, with some things going on in Cleveland, Ohio, because he was dealing with the church over there too. It's another story. I'll get to that soon. I'm gonna go back to that. But needless to say, I had to really start evaluating some things, and one of the things that, in addition to his behavior and how he talked to us and stuff like that, how he didn't have time for us, how he was like a big wig. Now, he was like, like I said, it's like he was the Mac, what I'm saying? Like he was super preacher, you know what I mean? And, like everything else was below him. If you ain't have a lot of money, you couldn't really say nothing to him, you know what I mean? I remember one time we had a men's meeting and he was like, what did you do today? What y'all do this morning before y'all got here? You know what I did? I made $100,000, And so, and he was like, I can show you too how you keep hanging with me. But then he would never show you, you know what I'm saying? He would just say that stuff to soup you up. But anyway, so things had just gotten really out of hand. I become discouraged and, I stopped coming to church. Okay. And as a matter of fact, it was so wild because by then I was really entrenched into the youth ministry. And there were friends of mine who I'm still friends with today who were also serving with me. We were there every Friday night and we were there with our kids, preteens and teens. We were really impactful in their lives because we were really honest with them. We were really there for them. We really ministered to them. And, we always kept it 100, you know what I'm saying? We did things the quote unquote biblical way, if you will, but we wasn't restrained to that, I mean? If a person wanted to talk about, look, it was fights in the youth group sometimes because, our kids wasn't these little goody two-shoes kids, man. They was hood kids. And we loved them. Like, we just loved them. Matter of fact, the more hood they was, seemed like this, the more we grabbed a hold to them, because we just saw hope and stuff in them, and we loved them. And we had some really good kids too. One couple I know now, they're a couple now, but they were in our youth group together. They're actually pastors, and so they were, less difficult to deal with. You know, they were always a joy to be around, and you know, obviously we loved on them too. They didn't need as much necessarily attention, but they were there, they were happy. And so it was a point where I didn't go to church for like 2 years, but I was going to youth ministry for 2 years. You know, and again, nobody ever knew. Pastor didn't know. Now my youth guys that I work with, they knew. And you know, they knew, and they didn't. It's not like they disagreed with my reasons and my theories, but their attitudes were more or less like, "Hey, we should pray for the pastor," blah blah blah. And but I had just become disenchanted because it got to the point where I would go to church happy, you know, and by the time he got through speaking, I'd be sad. Like literally, I'd be grieved. I'd be grieved because I just felt, you know, so beat up, you know, by, you know, his messages. And the funny thing is even after I left, you know, it came a time when the youth minister asked me to leave, you know, because I wasn't coming to church. But as again, it was after a couple of years, and you know, I respectfully, you know, went on and stepped down from there, you know, and eventually all of them ended up leaving. You know, every last person that was in the youth ministry ended up leaving. This, and the youth leader himself, who the pastor handpicked, told me, you know, years later that, you know what, out of all the years that I served in youth ministry as youth leader, you know, I never had one meeting with Pastor Ferguson concerning youth. I never had one meeting with him, you know. And then I thought about some other things too, like, you know, I didn't know where the pastor lived. You know what I'm saying? And it may not seem like a big deal, but if I'm at your church for like 15 years or more, which I had been, and I don't know where you live, you know what I'm saying? Like, like, it's like you got this other life. You know what I'm saying? Uh, you don't want us around. You dig? And that just didn't seem. I'm sure some people probably had been there, you know, but most of us hadn't. Another thing that was disenchanting was because Pastor Ferguson was really a good teacher. Uh, the Abundant Life group had raised some really, really magnificent, bright people who wanted to be in ministry themselves. And I don't mean just like start a church per se, but you know, a couple that had a marriage ministry, and there were some other people who, you know, wanted to do certain things, but the church would never give them the umbrella to do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, so they couldn't tell anybody in the church that what they were doing. They had to tell them out, call them, or whatever. You know, the church would never bless them. But he was always would say, "Hey, I'm raising leaders. You know, not followers. I'm raising leaders." But then when it was time for somebody to lead and do their thing, he wouldn't bless them to do it. You know, I think I remember one guy that I remember him blessing, you know, to go out and start a church in Alton, Illinois, if I'm not mistaken. But there was a lot of people who were underdeveloped, stunted, and ended up having to leave just to express themselves the way they believed God had, you know, had them to express themselves, right? And but you know, but here's Pastor Ferguson's. His, in my opinion, his thing was the numbers, right? So if he lose these people and they go doing stuff, then that's going to take money away from his building fund. Because again, it had taken years and years and years before, you know, it was one tractor or one shovel on this land. You did. So, you know, he was manipulating people. You know what I mean? He wouldn't like bless you to go out there and fail. You know what I'm saying? He wouldn't, you know, hey man, go out there and fail, whatever. You know, I raised you right. You know, you've been grounded in the word, this, that, and the other, you know, things that they say. He would never do that. You know what I'm saying? So it was just a lot of people that were stunning. And I was like, you know, why, you know, I don't want to be, I don't want to be in this type of environment. So, you know, I ended up quitting, you know, and I missed a lot of the people, you know, who I ran with, and some of them, you know, we still ran together. A lot of my youth guys, we played basketball together. We played 3-on-3 tournaments and stuff like that. Got in the Hoop It Up, got in the Gunsmacker, you know, and we did our thing. And like I said, man, a lot of them, you know, we're still tight to this day. But you know, that was my experience with that, and and what I learned, and this is be part of what we talk about next week, is what I learned is like, you know, the Pastor Ferguson thing, you know, it was to a degree, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm singling him out because I'm not. I'm talking about Pastor Ferguson because of the impact it had on my life and because of all the money, all the time, all the life investment that I had put into going to that church and contributing and adding something, of substance to that church. I didn't want to be a minister. I didn't want to be a preacher. I didn't want to, take anything from the church. I wanted to give something back. And, but I just felt like, it was just, it just ended up being a very cancerous, spiritually cancerous environment for me. So I had to let it go. So I talked about some things that was going on in Cleveland. And to me, again, I think this deals with, the back end of it deals with something that we were dealing with at Abundant Life. So, I would notice sometimes that Pastor Ferguson would be gone, sometimes 2-3 weeks in a row, what have you. And, nobody ever knew where he was. Like, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that was the thing, man. There was a lot of secrecy with Pastor Ferguson. There was a lot of secrecy with the Ferguson family, and excuse me, a lot of secrecy there. And they was kind of doing their own thing. So come to find out, these articles come out in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. It's a series. This is from 1999. So basically what was going on is there was this church called Full Gospel Full Gospel Evangelistic Center. And basically what was going on, and the long and short of it, is that it was a coup. Basically, it was a coup. Pastor Ferguson was sent there to be an overseer. Somebody asked him, the pastor there actually asked him for his help. He came over there, moved the pastor out the way, was promoting another pastor, and then tried to take over for that pastor, And so basically they, him and his wife, they buy $500,000 cribs out there in Cleveland. But again, mind you, they want us to pay for this building. You dig? They want us to pay for this building. Now, mind you, they don't never come to St. Louis and say we was in Cleveland. I've never heard one time where he was mentoring another church, blah, blah, blah. He was calling himself bishop, and I still is. But, basically, if you're a bishop, that means you kind of oversee other churches. But there was never any information given to us as specifically where he was going, what he was doing, what, how he was doing, whatever. And you may think that's none of our business, but it is our business, if you ask me, because we're the ones investing our time, our finances and whatnot, our lives into your vision. So therefore, we do have a right to know some things at least. But anyway, let me read you a little bit of what, as we close out, a little bit of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. This is from David Briggs and Joe Retchick. And this is one of the things that he would tell this congregation. And the reason I know these words are true is because he would say these same words to us. Quote, I'm a multimillionaire, come to help you get some sense. I ain't bragging, I'm just telling the truth. I'm a bad boy. When you can start paying cash for your Rolex watch, then you got enough nerve to smirk and cross your eyes at me. I'm not threatening anybody, but I've seen this happen in ministry, and I say this to warn the people. I've seen it within 3 years after people start coming against me. I've seen it, not just once, not just twice, many, many times within 3 years. They either have a stroke or have some kind of incurable disease or die physically dead. Now, I know that to be true because that's the same stuff he was telling us. The story goes on. This is when we're getting to the coup part. In April, according to church minutes, Ferguson appeared before the church elders and board directors and told them of God's plan for him to take over as pastor of Full Gospel. So I guess he was going to be pastor of Abundant Life in St. Louis and pastor of Full Gospel in Cleveland. And this is what he said. The Lord said, I sent you as an apostle. There are 3 that I sent to America, and you're one of them. I'm giving you Mid-America. Your responsibility is Mid-America. I could get every one of you out of debt right now. The Lord has given me the power to put that under my feet. Only money is keeping you from what God has called you to do. Within a year, I'll make you a millionaire. But then he held the church leaders to a vow of silence. The congregation would not be told about Ferguson's plans to become pastor until the church's 22nd anniversary in May. So he breaks this announcement out, and this is what the paper said about it. Imagine sitting in the pew that day when an out-of-town minister steps up to the pulpit and announces that God told him to become the new pastor of Full Gospel. Several worshipers who were in the church that day say the service broke down to a mass of tears, shock, and confusion. There were audible gasps and wailing. Yvonne George said, "I had never experienced anything like this in all my Christian years. Actually, it was kind of scary." Then it says at the end of this, then Ferguson got a surprise plan of his own. Jordan, who was the pastor at that time, was not going along with the plan. The pastor, who prepared services by humbly kneeling in prayer in the corner of a church, went to the pulpit and told the congregation that he too had gone before God, and God told him to remain the pastor of Full Gospel. Now, what happened since then, I cannot tell you. I don't know. That was in 1999. It's been well over a decade since I've gone Abundant Life. But I'm just telling you, this is what we were dealing with. We only knew about this because it was in the paper, and they ended up doing a whole series about it, being investigated by the Attorney General with these investments and things. But at the end of the day, what this boils down to was, a person using that deity factor, right? They're using that sense of deity that God told them, supposedly, right, to control a group of people. And what happened? So, it wasn't a Jim Jones situation where people were drinking Kool-Aid to die, but it was definitely a situation where people were, losing, they were, a lot of them in financial trouble. I remember when Pastor Ferguson would get up on his building fund rants and he would say something like, y'all got money. You don't think you got money? Y'all got money. You got equity in your house. You got equity in your house. That ain't your money. That's God's money. Get up off that money, right? So he would say that kind of stuff, and, it wasn't, I don't know how many people went for that. I could tell you, I might have did the 5,000 that one time. I wasn't finna do that. You know what I'm saying? Negro, you must be crazy. Not finna, anyway, I'm done. I'm gonna wrap this up now. It's going on long enough. Thank you for staying with me. We got 2 more parts in this series. Next week, we're going to talk about just my journey after Abundant Life, because there were some other places I started to visit. And then I think I ended up joining 2 more churches after that in my entire life since then. So we're going to talk about that journey. And then the last episode will be to talk about where I am now, what I believe now, why I believe what I believe. So, hey, thank you for joining me. I know that was long. I hope it came out well. I know this is the most challenging episode for sure for me, just to relive all that stuff and try to articulate it in a way that seems informative and somewhat entertaining to you. So anyway, signing off. See you soon, and thanks for watching, and keep it real.